get started. Megan, you want to start us off?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks so much again for joining us this afternoon. Welcome to all of our RSO advisors, as well as our fraternity and sorority advisors. We are happy to have all of you here with us today. I guess before I go too much further, we should introduce ourselves. So my name is Megan Brower, and I serve as the Assistant Director for Fraternity and Sorority Life in the Office of Student Involvement and Activities, and my pronouns are she, her, hers.
Hi, I'm Marnie Dow. I also use the pronouns she, her, and hers, and I serve as the Assistant Director for Student Involvement.
Awesome. So let me tell you a little bit about the why of our presentation before we dive in. I am a big fan of the start with why kind of concept. I infuse it in everything. So if you've heard me speak before, this probably sounds familiar, but we felt like this topic was particularly timely this semester with the multiple kind of movements that are going on, the kind of woven into the fabric of the election that just happened, the groundswell of different social justice conversations that have been happening on college campuses, including UNLV. We know that individuals and organizations are all doing a lot of reflecting right now and assessing what values that we hold as organizations and individuals, or the ones that we should hold a little bit more overtly. So today we're not going to be teaching you about diversity, equity, and inclusion, going through a laundry list of definitions. We definitely encourage you to explore different resources that are out there already, if that's something that you feel like you would like to do, and kind of expand your own knowledge base on the history of different injustices toward marginalized groups in this country. There are tons of books, articles, podcasts, all of that kind of stuff. But what we are going to be doing here today is talking about different tips and tricks and just some food for thought, things to think about in helping your student leaders process through and navigate some changes that might be needed in their organizations.
So we want to go ahead and put out there acknowledge some things right off the bat. Megan and I are two white cisgender women with a lot of privilege. We in no way feel like we're authorities on this topic. We in no way feel like we are experts in any way. And also we have realized that it's impossible to just decide that this belongs to somebody else, that because we don't have the same lived experiences as marginalized communities, that we hold so much privilege that we can just say that we're not the right people to speak on this. There are certainly better people to speak on this, but we feel like with our jobs, it's our responsibility to make sure that we're prioritizing this conversation. We want to note that we may be imperfect, and that's okay. That's part of the process. You have to be willing to undertake the possibility of imperfection in order for real growth and change to happen. We all need to do this work. It's all of our responsibility. It doesn't fall only on people who do DEI work. It doesn't follow only on individuals of marginalized communities. We cannot put that burden on those individuals. We have to take the burden on every single one of us, regardless of our identity. If you advise a student organization, it is everybody's responsibility. It belongs to every student organization, it belongs to every advisor. We also want to acknowledge that there is no we all know none of us have extra time. Particularly, I'll be the first to say, sometimes it's overwhelming within a hiring freeze. I have 2 vacant positions under me, and yet I know I have to make time for this. I have to make time on my own to do research, to figure out how I'm going to have difficult conversations, to figure out how I'm going to address this with the students that I work with. If I wait for the extra time, it's never going to happen. We all feel like we're overwhelmed with so much work to do. There is no extra time for any of us. We just have to find our way to it. I also want to say that sometimes you need to be willing to separate your own personal opinions when you're helping students work through challenges. It's not about what you think. It's not about what you feel, whatever your politics are, whatever your world viewpoints are. It's really important that this be about advocating for all students on this campus, that we advocate for the access of every student on this campus, that we advocate that marginalized voices be heard, and that our students understand the importance of that. regardless of what your personal opinions are. And this needs to be the work of all student organizations. This does not just belong to student organizations that are related to multiculturalism, international or identities, those whose missions are about advocacy. That's not who this belongs to. This belongs to every single student organization. If the Harry Potter Club existed on campus, it would belong to them. It belongs to every academic organization. It belongs to every fraternity or sorority. This is the responsibility of every single student organization on campus.
So let's talk a little bit about who our students are right now and the different characteristics that they're bringing to the table, causing more advocacy and activism on campus than we've seen in previous years. So on the screen, we've just got 3 different images there. Generation Z, a picture of a laptop computer, and then a sign at what appears to be a protest that says, "Fight today for a better tomorrow." So that in a nutshell is Generation Z. So if you've been to my full-length presentation on this topic, you've heard a lot of this before, so I'm not going to go too much into detail. But Generation Z is the group of individuals who were born roughly between 1997 and 2018. So we, a couple of years ago, started seeing Gen Z students arrive on UNLV's campus. This is the most diverse generation that the United States has ever seen. And so that means that they not only expect diversity, but they want it to be celebrated and embraced and woven into everything that they do. They are a generation that is focused on activism and advocacy, tied very closely to technology. They don't know a world without technology. They never dealt with dial-up internet or flip phones or any of that stuff that many of us probably experienced. So that means that they have increased exposure to different thoughts, the sharing of those thoughts, and they are able to create and engage activism platforms at all times, 24/7. That means that the speed at which movements gain traction and followership and engagement is also very accelerated due to all of those things. So because we are going to be seeing more and more Gen Z students on our campus for quite some time, this is the group that you're probably going to be primarily advising in your student organizations and your fraternities and sororities. So just wanted to lay a little bit of groundwork there.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about the importance of having a shared understanding of cultural competence. So student leaders should make sure that they're all working from the same basic definitions and understandings of terminology. So on the screen here, I've put some basic DEI concepts on the screen. So just the idea of what does it mean, diversity, inclusion, systemic racism, identity, implicit bias, privilege, microaggressions, cultural appropriation, and anti-racism. As Megan mentioned earlier, this presentation isn't about teaching you these concepts. I'm hoping that you'll have some idea of these concepts, but the ability for what I want to focus here is that students, before they can really have conversations about how to make their organizations more equitable, the first thing to ask is, well, are we all working from the same understanding of what the term diversity even means? Diversity is really about statistics. It's not about how we serve those populations. What is systemic racism? What is implicit bias? So we worked really hard this summer to totally revamp our diversity, equity, and inclusion training that we require student leaders to go through in order to complete the registration process. Now, I will say that we only require 1 student from every student organization to complete that training. So that training, I think, could be really helpful to our student leaders, even those who don't have to take it as part of the registration process. I put the link directly there to the video where we really dive into all of these, not only about what all of these terms mean, but what does that mean in relation to student organizations. I tried in that presentation to give a lot of examples of how this directly relates to the work of our student organizations. Cultural appropriation, for example. I gave a lot of examples of things we've seen in the past from our student organizations. So I'm hopeful that that's a helpful resource for all of you. But really, having that first initial conversation with your student leaders, are we all working from the same basic deck of cultural competence? Not everyone is going to be an expert. Not everyone has taken the time to really dive into what these concepts mean. A lot of them have heard these terms, but maybe don't feel comfortable really being able to talk about them in a group setting. So this is a kind of a basic groundwork that can be laid first with your student leaders.
Bravery. So engaging in these conversations often requires some bravery. So you might have heard the term safe space before. I wanted to bring that up because we don't necessarily love the term safe space because we can't always guarantee that other people might not be offended by different conversations or upset by them or have differing views. We typically use an adaptation of that that's called brave space. So that basically means we are encouraging other folks in a space with us to take risks, be brave in what they're saying and how they accept and view others, and want to add to their own kind of knowledge base around other humans. So we all have to be okay with knowing that we might miss the mark sometimes, and we might be held accountable for those misses, but it's still important to take that risk. Kind of going back to what Marnie was saying in the beginning, kind of what we're doing here today. So students pick up on what other folks are doing, people that they trust, and what they're saying and doing regarding these topics, especially quote unquote adults. So all of us in their lives, you can help kind of normalize this behavior based on your own integration of these topics in your day-to-day life. So I think that while it might be scary for us to admit our own mistakes or bring up, hey, I missed the mark on that comment. Here's what I meant, but here's how I'm going to do better in the future. And really taking ownership of those things, that makes us more relatable and makes us human to our students. And I honestly think it makes us a little bit more credible. Despite what we may feel it does to our credibility with students, it's real, and students like that. They like real people, not robot advisors, right? Like, we're not perfect, and that's okay. So I would ask you to challenge your students to be vocal and bold in these conversations and challenge them to do that, and support them when it goes well and when it doesn't go as well. Just like any aspect of advising, we don't just want to swoop in and show up when things aren't going well. We want to make sure we're giving them positive feedback, especially when we know it takes a lot of bravery to engage in these conversations. So when they are taking that step, taking a stand, showing what's important to them as an organization, let's support them through that. And then we should be giving feedback to individuals typically how they would prefer to receive that feedback and be celebrated publicly or privately. But I would also say that seeing others be brave and be celebrated for that will inspire a culture within the larger organization. And I think that oftentimes that's the way to go with this particular conversation.
Yeah, before we move on to the next slide, something I want to add to that is, this is something I've tried really hard to do in my advising. I advise a few different groups. This year is making it clear to the students that I advise that I want to be called out. That if I do something inappropriate, if I step over a line, if I say something that is offensive or someone has problems with, I actually hope that they'll say something to me publicly in front of the entire group. That's not because I'm excited about taking feedback that way. That's not how I personally love to get feedback, but I am hoping to set an example for our students that I want to be brave, that this is work that is important to me, that if someone gives me feedback, that I'm going to accept it and learn from it and change from it. And we know that our students learn through example, that if I can create an example for them, that's what I really want to do. And it's hard. And it does take, a bravery that sometimes I wonder if I have. I haven't had a student call me out yet. We'll talk a little bit later about calling out versus calling in. But it's something that I've tried to make a top-down approach with the groups that I advise about. I'm never going to hold it against you if you call me out. I don't want you to wait until we're in a private space. I want you to call me out publicly because I want others to see that that I can take that feedback, that I can learn from it and grow from it, and that we're not just going to let a comment that bothered someone go. I'm going to put this graphic on here. So we're trying to give some verbal image descriptions because we know it's hard to see these images on the screen. Hopefully the PDFs are a little more helpful. Also, some people, not everyone can easily see graphics. So, but this graphic has been incredibly helpful to me as I think about the idea of becoming anti-racist. So what this graphic does is talk about 3 areas of learning when it comes to being anti-racist: the fear zone, the learning zone, and the growth zone, and how I as an individual can try to travel through the fear zone where I'm denying the problem, I avoid questions, I strive to just for comfort, and I talk to others who think and look like me, and I avoid anything else. That I want to work past that into a learning zone where I recognize the present problem, I seek out questions that make me uncomfortable, I understand my own privilege, I educate myself about race and structural racism, I'm vulnerable, and that I look for experiences that are different for me, from people to talk to that are different from me. But that's not enough. I need to move into the growth zone. I need to identify how I unknowingly have benefited from racism. I need to understand how to promote and advocate for policies that are anti-racist, not just support them, but advocate for them. I need to learn how to sit with my discomfort and understand that what is my first reaction is probably what I've been taught, and that I need to go with what's beyond that first reaction sometimes. I need to speak out when I see things that are racist. I need to educate my peers. I need to make sure that mistakes don't deter me from being better, that I don't just be like, oh, I'm not getting it right, and walk away. That I yield positions of power to those who are otherwise marginalized, that I don't take the time to think that I speak for marginalized communities, and then I'm willing to surround myself with others who think and look differently than me, that act differently, that have different viewpoints. That's really important. For me, a lot of times I have come back to this graphic and been like, that's a fear zone thing, that's a growth zone thing. Just like we tell our students that we tell ourselves that we want to make sure we're recognizing in our student leaders not only what they do poorly, but what they do well. That's important to give yourself that grace too. Sometimes it's okay to pat yourself on the back internally and say, like, I'm actually really proud of myself, because I don't think a few months ago I would have been able to be as forward about that. I would have been able to advocate for that. That doesn't necessarily mean you need to shout that from the rooftops and tell everyone else you're doing that. But internally, it's okay to applaud your own growth in this area.
So at this point, we want to talk a little bit about how organizations can be proactive in making sure that programming and marketing are both inclusive. So we know that you all as advisors probably aren't the ones doing all of the program planning. Maybe sometimes you are. We've all been there. But what we can serve as is kind of the bumpers on a bowling lane, right? And so I want to walk through some different identities that should be considered when planning for programs and when planning for marketing as well. So this generation is expecting to have different options and feel included, no matter what they bring to the table, no matter their background or who they are, what identities they have. So we want to make sure that we're advising our organizations and considering all of those different factors when planning both in-person programs, when those happen again, and virtual. So obviously those considerations will be slightly different. But think of this as maybe a list to refer to later down the road when we're able to have in-person programs again. But so race, ethnicity, and culture. So just an example of something to consider here is making sure our organizations aren't catering to just one population with music, with food, different kind of elements of our program there. And making sure we're not utilizing decor or different traditions that we might not totally understand or know the true history of. Age, so not everything that our organizations are planning in terms of programs should be catered toward only the 18 to 24 kind of traditional college age set. We know that at UNLV, our average age student is a little bit, that age is a little bit higher than other institutions we may have worked at. So catering to a wider variety of ages is going to be a great idea. Veteran status. So is there a disclaimer about different elements of the event that might be helpful. So if you're going to be having fireworks at an event or other kind of loud or startling noises, is there a way that you can make sure that attendees know that that will be happening at your event so they can be prepared for that? Parent status. So are we thinking about our students who might be parents and not just having programs at the same time every day? Or are we including family members in programs and making them a little bit more inclusive that way? Sexual orientation and gender identity. There used to be a program at UNLV that was, just as an example, speed dating. And it was kind of your traditional program where there were the chairs lined up and you have a certain amount of time with folks and then you rotate around. And it was very much catered toward a heterosexual relationship finding. So, you know, we definitely modified that program and that's not something we even do at all anymore. But are we limiting kind of who can participate in different programs that way? Religion. So thinking about holiday related programs, the dates that programs are falling on, have you overlapped the holiday calendar onto your Google Calendar to make sure that we're keeping in mind all of the various faiths and their holidays and days that we should probably avoid in our programming to make sure folks are included? Are we including a space and time for prayer for different faiths? Accessibility, are we including closed captioning on videos? Are we having elements in our programs that are beyond just physical activities? So if the program falls around kind of the concept of an obstacle course, that can be challenging for some folks. Socioeconomic status. Do the students attending our programs need to pay a fee? Is there a financial barrier to attending? Do our students have access to the technology and the internet that they need to participate in virtual programs? So that is by no means exhaustive list of different identities or examples of those, but wanted to at least touch on that. And then related is marketing. So let's say your organization is all ready to go with an inclusive program. Marketing for that program sets the tone for what students can expect when attending before that program even starts. So doing a little bit of research or having your students do a little bit of research on universal design will ensure that marketing materials, printed ones as well as electronic, are going to be accessible. So just a few quick tips and tricks here. Making sure colors contrast in a way that makes them easier to read. So white text on a black background or vice versa, always a good bet there, versus red or scarlet rather, and gray overlapping isn't always the best, although very school spirity like that. Making sure fonts are easy to read. So all those kind of swirly, curly fonts or all caps, not always easy to read, especially at a glance. PDFs should be accessible in a way that can be read by a screen reader. Doing image descriptions like we've been doing throughout this presentation is always a good idea, especially on Instagram, which is very photo heavy. So as I said, just a few quick ideas, but if you want more information on that topic, I'll put the bit.ly to the presentation here. It was created by a past staff member, Melissa Taylor, who is our resident expert on marketing on our staff. So she put together an awesome, more comprehensive presentation on this exact topic that might be helpful. And then we also want to make sure our organizations are showing cultural competence in marketing. So just a few quick examples that are kind of real life examples that we have seen. So around Halloween time, Day of the Dead, we might start to see some sugar skull images on marketing because they look cool or they're festive without folks always knowing the history and the importance of that tradition. And so that would be considered cultural appropriation. So making sure we're avoiding that. Around early May, we may start to see some sombrero imagery on different marketing. We all know companies that still do that. And so that too would be an example of cultural appropriation and something we want to avoid. Do the humans depicted in marketing represent the diversity of our student population? So whether that is photos of organization members or illustrations of those. I remember I had a student staff member one time that I talked to about, she was running the Fraternity and Sorority Life Instagram at the time, and she identified as white. And she liked to use a lot of different emojis in the captions for our Instagram posts. And so you could tell that she was pulling them from her most recent used emojis, and they tended to be a lot of white images, white hands, white faces. And so we had a conversation about that, about how that doesn't really represent the true diversity of our fraternity and sorority community. So a couple just quick examples there. And then digital blackface is a concept that I am newly familiar with. I will admit that. So this is kind of the use of GIFs, I think that's how you say it, right? And memes that have imagery of folks who appear to be African American or Black. And typically they are reinforcing stereotypes about that population. And it still kind of brings about a caricature feel, even though, you know, it's in a digital form, which is different than its older counterpart, blackface. But so I wanted to bring that up as maybe a new topic for some of you. So there is a great article. I'll put the link in the chat as well for that one, so that you can check it out and read more, because I found it to be really interesting.
Sorry about that if you're hearing the dog in the background. So we're going to move on to some things that we've seen student organization make mistakes in the past, missteps in the past. And so talk about how can we want to work into how do we as advisors help them through that process. So remembering that missteps can either be from an organization as a whole or individual members. We've certainly seen this in the context. For example, Megan talked earlier about sombreros or things, you know, in around May programming about Cinco de Mayo. If that program is not actually about the actual cultural representation of Cinco de Mayo in the Mexican culture, and they're just using it because it's on May 5th, that's not appropriate. That's kind of something as an organization, a choice that wasn't great. But individual members, doesn't matter if whether they're working on behalf of the organization or not. We have definitely seen instances in which individual members have either old tweets, memes, postings online, or current tweets and postings have really gotten an organization in trouble. I'm going to use CSUN as an example. It's happened more than once, where we've seen an elected official whose old tweets came up that they've had to answer for, or we've seen an elected, there was recently a senator who was consistently currently posting things that other senators found incredibly offensive. It doesn't matter that was on that person's individual social media. They're an elected official in that organization. Whether you want them to represent that organization or not, they do. People are going to associate that person with the student organization. So even if the organization denounces that individuals, it's really hard to disconnect between what any one individual does and say, like, well, that's that person, that's not the organization. But if they're part of the organization, you're enmeshed together for good or for bad. So that's really important for students to understand that just because that you did that on your personal page doesn't mean it's not going to come back to the organization. We also want to remind students sometimes that this isn't only public facing. We see it a lot in private communications, and I'm really going to put private in air quotes, in private communications, because if it's in writing in any way, it's not private. If that is a text message, a tweet, a group me, a DM on Instagram, not actually private, anyone can take a screenshot and post it on the most public forum, and students forget that a lot. So we have seen a lot of instances of students having very problematic conversations in group me's, either of a small number of members or an e-board or a whole membership base that they think is only for the people in that group. But one person in that group is like, this isn't cool. And they take a screenshot, and all of a sudden it's in Scarlet and Gray Free Press, or it's in the Las Vegas Review Journal. We've definitely seen that happen before. So, making sure our students understand that private to you and private in actuality may not be the same thing. As your advisor, you can be there to help them look for ways to turn those missteps into teachable moments. I think that's one of the greatest gifts that you can give as an advisor, is to talk to either the organization or the individual and say, okay, let's own our mistake, but let's not just own our mistake. How do we move forward? How do we make that a teachable moment where I help you be better? I help you have a debrief conversation. I help you figure out, how do I not step in it again? How do I help save the reputation of this organization? Megan and I talked about this. She has this great way when she talks to students about talking about 2 levels of decision making. Why did you post that, and what did you post? So not just like, here's what was problematic, but like, what made you think that that was a good idea? That's a conversation that you as an advisor can really have with your students and your student leaders in the organization. Let's talk about what you did, maybe why it wasn't a great idea. Do you think it was a good idea? Do others think it was a good idea? Open that conversation, but also like, why did you do it? Why did you think that was an appropriate place? Why did you feel safe, or that you were emboldened to do so? That's a really important part that I think sometimes gets lost. Is really easy to just be like, well, we just focused on what happened. We didn't focus on anything that led up to that, and that can be just as important.
Yeah, so let's say that an organization member has had a misstep and it's time to have a conversation with that person as an advisor. It's going to be really helpful if you've already got a relationship established with them. So if you've got that foundation of trust, they will see you as a human, hopefully, not just someone who comes in and lays the hammer down, that authority figure that is there to kind of get them in trouble, right? On the flip side, try not to avoid those tough conversations when the accountability is necessary. So if a student offhanded kind of makes a quick, inappropriate joke around you or to you, and you say nothing, then it could snowball out of control. That same joke or something similar could show up on social media later. So I would say if we can have conversations when they are a little bit smaller things before they become bigger things, that is always in our best interest. And to Marnie's point earlier, invite students to hold you accountable as well. Whenever I'm having these types of conversations with students at our beginning of the semester chapter president's meeting, I said, I'll hold you accountable. Please do the same for me. I also would like to grow and learn. This is not a one-way street, and it's got nothing to do with titles or authority or hierarchy. We all are kind of in this together at some level, and we all want to be better. So overall, I would say make sure that you are leading by example here. I think that's going to be the most important thing, and student organizations and their members will figure out what is okay based on what you do and the parameters that you set for them and the conversations you're willing to have.
So on that same vein, well, how do you have those conversations? How do you address those missteps? So let's talk about the idea of calling out versus calling in. And on the next slide, I'm going to give you some concrete examples. But the idea of calling in is that calling out. This is powerful for the target of oppression to hear that these words from an ally. You address it in the moment. When you hear something that's not okay, you do not let it slide. You call it out in the moment. It's when we need to let someone know their words or actions are completely unacceptable. Like, nope, not okay. You said something that's not okay. We need to call it out in the moment, because the people who heard that need to hear you call it out. When we need to interrupt or prevent further harm, when we see someone's already causing damage and we want to make sure that doesn't snowball and get worse and worse, that's when it's time to call it out. It will feel hard and uncomfortable, but it is incredibly necessary. And it helps put the pause button and break momentum when someone's just like, oh, nope, let's stop right there. Calling in, this is focusing on the behavior while calling the person in. So when there's an opportunity to explore deeper, make meaning, or find mutual understanding, it's when we're seeking to understand and learn and provide for multiple perspectives, and focuses on reflection over reaction. So those all seem like very high level concepts. So the question is, well, what does that actually, how does that manifest? So some examples of calling out on the left. and some examples of calling in. So when you hear something offensive, say, well, nope, ouch, I need you to stop right there. Or I don't find that funny. Tell me why is that funny to you? I don't think that's funny. I don't think that joke's okay. Why do you think that joke is okay? It sounds like you're making some assumptions that we need to unpack a bit. Or I feel obligated to tell you that your comment not okay with me, and I don't think other people are going to be okay with it. Or, okay, I'm having a strong reaction to that, and I need to tell you why I don't feel comfortable with that. Whereas calling in, some examples would be, I'm curious, what was the intention of your words? Why did you assume about others? What did you assume about others that made you come to that conclusion? Why do you believe that to be true? These are more probing questions to help students reflect, as opposed to just a flat out reaction to be like, nope, that's okay, not okay. That calling out on the left is the nope, nope, nope. And the calling in on the right is like, okay, let's pause and reflect on this a little bit. How might someone else see that differently? How is it possible someone else might interpret your words or actions? What is making you most fearful or nervous or worried or uncomfortable? So these examples came from a resource called Seed the Way that is linked in the PDF. So if you go to that bit.ly that I'll repeat at the very end, that link for Seed the Way is clickable, so you can go to some more examples if you want to try to figure out ways to add these into your vocabulary of, I think we all have this sort of like toolbox of things we say a lot. These are things that you can add to your toolbox.
Awesome. So I think Marnie and I, when we were creating this presentation, we can both reflect on times where we've had tough conversations with students, and sometimes they will bring up the idea of, well, I'm in college though. Isn't the whole idea of college that I'm supposed to be learning and growing and figuring it out? Yes. And sometimes when we make a misstep, you don't just get to use that as an excuse, right? So we know, and we all believe as advisors of various organizations, that college, especially being a part of a student organization, is the whole point is to prepare them for life after college and the quote unquote real world. So the workforce, graduate school, military service, family life, all of those various things. And we all know that we are all held accountable for our actions, regardless of what season of life we are in. So the stakes may not be as high for a college student because they may not be in a position where they're getting let go from their job based on something that they posted on social media, which is very real. And as we all know, has happened based on various movements for the last several years. We've seen a lot of that in the media. So the stakes might not be that high, might not be that high. They might be, but the stakes are still there. And it still matters and it's still important. So while we definitely want to encourage that growth, that is not just going to let a student off the hook. So making that really clear. And I wanted to touch on intent versus impact. Likely many of you have heard this concept. So the idea is kind of the juxtaposition sometimes between what someone meant by something, a comment, a joke, a whatever, and then how it impacted others. So we've all heard students probably say to one another, or just people in our life outside of our advising roles, I didn't mean it like that. Or, well, they're just being really sensitive. Or it was just a joke. And okay, that may be true, but that doesn't mean it didn't leave a mark. And so you as the person who made that comment or joke or post is responsible for understanding that impact and repairing any harm that was done. Especially if it's within an organization, repairing that relationship and coming to terms with that is really important moving forward.
So cancel culture, it's something that we hear a lot in the news about, like, well, they're just canceled. They made a mistake, they're canceled. So let's have the conversation with our students. When is a student canceled and when can they learn from that? So, ask the question, should students who make mistakes be given a second chance? This is incredibly situational and there is no such thing as a one-size-fits-all answer to this. So this is where you as an advisor can help the students have meaningful conversations before they just jump to like, oh, they're removed. They're off the board. They're not a member of this organization anymore. Let's have a reflective conversation about it first. Is the student or the organization able or willing to from this moment? So can the organization do better? Is that student willing to put in the work and commit to making change? If they're just like, nope, I'm not, if they're not going to own up to that, then the question is, if they can't be a good asset to this organization, maybe that is when the organization cuts ties. But if they're honestly willing to kind of look inside themselves and say, like, I really screwed up and I can do better and I'm going to work on it, then maybe this is an opportunity to give them a second chance. Can an offending student still be an asset to the organization, or does their continued membership further damage the reputation of the organization? That is a real important question for the organization members out, particularly if it's one person that made a mistake. If the organization has to decide, is that student just a distraction now? Does continuing to have them in the organization just do more damage? Or can we kind of make sure that the organization continues to function well and be healthy with them in the fold? This is really important. Does the inclusion of the offending student continue to traumatize others? The students who were traumatized or anyone who felt offended, they come before the offending student. Whoever the damage was done to, their feelings matter more. Whatever marginalized community was targeted or oppressed, that matters more than the individual student who feels like they're being oppressed because they can't continue in the organization. You really have to do the looking at what the impact that Megan talked about, who is being impacted, what is that impact, and does inclusion of that offending student just re-traumatize individuals in the organization? If that's the case, the students who have been traumatized need to be prioritized in that conversation.
All right, let's talk about apologies and statements. So we've obviously seen a lot of statements this year, particularly around Black Lives Matter. And so I wanted to provide a little bit of framework that you can help your organization utilize when writing either an apology or a statement. So they're lumped together here, but obviously an apology would be in response to something. So more than likely a misstep of one of its members or of the organization as a whole, whereas a statement can be a little bit more proactive. So we definitely want to be sincere. If an organization is just writing a statement because they feel pressured to do so or because everyone is doing it, that's going to show in that statement. On the flip side, if the organization really believes in a cause and wants to make change, that passion is going to shine through the words of that organization. The statement should state what they stand for and also what they don't stand for, and how the organization is going to show that moving forward. And the organization should be ready to have folks hold them accountable if they're not true to their word on that one. And I skipped over, take ownership of missteps, don't deflect blame on others. I think especially with apologies, we can see that sometimes of sort of making excuses as to why that behavior occurred or why that incident occurred. We want to encourage our organizations to see it more holistically and don't deflect it, because then that sincerity piece I was talking about is completely gone. And then actionable items. So make sure that the organization is committing to actually doing the work. So that will look different in every organization, how they want to show a commitment to a movement. So whether that is, donating or individual growth and development, a group training, or, there are definitely tons of different ways that our organizations can engage in this work, but saying what they're going to commit to do and how they're going to do it. And it's even better to have a time frame. So in the short term, we will be accomplishing X, and then longer term, we're going to be accomplishing Y. That really shows a long-term commitment beyond just when the statement comes out and it feels like it's a hot topic in that moment. We want to make sure that this is a longer lasting cultural shift that actually sticks around. And then the timeliness of a statement as well. So there's, I think a lot of organizations handle the Black Lives Matter statements in different ways. So there could be a debate sort of, do we go ahead and crank out a statement quickly in order to address something in that moment when it is most important to take a stand on an issue, or do we take a little bit more time and craft a more thoughtful response? So I think when the Monday after the murder of George Floyd, when nearly every business organization we've ever heard of was issuing statements on social media and emailing, I think we saw a little bit of both. I think we saw a lot of that quick reaction, but I know that I've been paying attention to who's still talking about it, who's still out there showing a commitment, and I'll give an example of an organization that is in just a second. So if it makes sense, can you help your organization do both? Can you help them craft an immediate response so that others aren't waiting to hear from them? Especially the more public organizations, folks are going to be looking to them to really, where do you stand on this? I got to know, and I have to know now. So sometimes that's important. And then can a more well thought out, a little bit more thoughtful one come out later, maybe once a group of leaders can get together and map out a game plan and how they're going to commit to that. So donating, protesting, training, changing hiring practices or election practices, or whatever that might look like in an organization. Some of those things are going to take a little bit more time, and that's okay. The commitment is what's important. So here's the example I was talking about. Here we've got a couple different images. I've got a screenshot from an organization that I believe has done this really well, and that is Ben & Jerry's ice cream. They make great ice cream, and they also are not afraid to stand up for what they believe in. And this was all over kind of social media when they posted their reactions a few different times now around the Black Lives Matter movement. So we've got that screenshot of a statement. There's an image that says, "We must dismantle white supremacy. Silence is not an option." And then we've also got a photo of an ice cream flavor called Empowerment that they developed back in 2016. So, and then it says Black Lives Matter there, and the profits from that ice cream went to the NAACP. So I liked a lot of things about how Ben & Jerry's has handled their engagement in the Black Lives Matter movement, not just in 2020 when it felt like the conversation became so universal that it's everywhere now, as it should be, but as I said, in 2016, they were doing blog posts and statements and social media presence then as well, and they have been ever since. So I like the clarity that they show in their statement. So for example, I know this is really small font, but one quote from this statement says, "What happened to George Floyd was not the result of a bad apple. It was the predictable consequence of a racist and prejudiced system and culture that has treated Black bodies as the enemy from the beginning." So I think that really sets a tone. There is no question of where Ben & Jerry's as a company stands on this issue. I love that. So I would encourage, in helping an organization build a statement, show that clarity. There should be very little room for argument if you're going to make a statement. It has concrete steps that need to be taken. So this particular statement has 4 things, and first, second, third, and finally are all highlighted. So there are 4 things that we are saying should be happening and we're going to support in these ways. Consistent messaging, it shouldn't just be a one and done. So if you go to Ben & Jerry's website, which I did, I was looking through all of their different blog posts and their social media, they're still talking about this issue, and they will continue to be talking about this issue, I believe. They've shown that consistency. It's not just a one and done. It is truly a core value of their company, and so they're able to talk the talk and walk the walk, which I really appreciate.
Okay, so we're coming close to the end. Looking at the time, we're right on schedule. So we want to make sure we provide some resources to not only you, but to your student organizations and your student leaders. So you want to make sure when you're looking at resources, we're not just thinking about one marginalized identity, that we're taking the time to learn about a lot of identities, not just based on race, but LGBTQ plus individuals, those who are Latinx, I apologize for the typo in there, Native and Indigenous cultures, Asian Pacific Islander and Middle Eastern cultures, non-traditional students, justice impacted students. That's a term for me that I learned within the last year that I hadn't thought about. Are students who have a previous record or are part of the criminal justice system in the past or present. Various economic groupings, differing abilities, veteran status, etc. That we're not just, if we're telling our students they need to do the work and do the learning, that is focused on a lot of identities, not just what the fad is now or what's the focus is on now. A focus in the media and in social media right now is rightfully on Black and brown individuals, but all of these identities have been marginalized in the history of America the whole time. And we need to make sure that our students know that they all matter. We need to learn about all of these identities and how can we support them. Make sure when you're looking for resources, sometimes students are like, oh, I'll do some research, and you want to help them find good resources. I know we've all done quick Google searches and be like, once you start to read through something, be like, this isn't the best resource. So helping students look for meaningful resources, so ones that explore the challenges of specific marginalized groups, that focus on systems and structures of racism and bias, ones that discuss how to avoid performative actions and create a reputation of true change. That's a big one. I think we're all seeing, kind of going back to what Megan talked about, a lot of these companies that issued the statement that first day after George Floyd's murder, are they still talking about it? Was that performative, or have they ingrained that thinking into how they exist as an organization? So making sure that our students, asking them like, well, how are you going to follow up on that? Is that just for the optics, or are you doing that because it matters? Would you still do that if no one knew about it? Those are questions to kind of figure out, is this about real change or is this about performance? And then we want to make sure we're amplifying the voices of individuals in marginalized groups. That I, as a white person, as a cisgender person, should never think that I can speak to the experience of someone who in a different identity than my own. That I should never be considered an authority on those. That I should always defer to individuals in those identities to speak for themselves. So when you're helping students look for resources, make sure they're looking for authentic voices. If they want to learn more about Native and Indigenous cultures, are they finding readings, writings, podcasts, documentaries that come from individuals of that identity? Or are they finding things that have someone speaking for a population? And then in the PDF, you'll be able to click on some references that we thought could be really helpful. References, when I created that diversity, equity, and inclusion training for student organizations that I mentioned earlier, that's the reference list that I use. It has a ton of good information in it. Student diversity and social justice, our partners on campus have created some really great resources. And then if you, as your student organization is looking maybe we'll read a book together or listen to a podcast or watch a documentary, that NPR list is pretty great. So I'm looking at the time. I'm going to wrap it up. We're going to wrap it up real fast. Go ahead, Megan.
So in general, I want us all to walk away with the feeling that we are looking for progress, not perfection, out of ourselves, out of our students. Any step in the right direction is worth doing. It's worth taking the time to encourage that growth in others and ourselves. So you all really do play an instrumental role in helping our student organizations move the needle and contribute to the future success of their organizations, and that will ultimately impact a greater UNLV culture.
Yeah, and there's a few things on here. I put these specific images on here, and again, I want to give a little bit of a verbal image description on these because I found them incredibly helpful. The image on the right is an individual holding up a sign that says, "Normalize changing your opinion on something after learning new information. It's okay, I promise." Sometimes students will dig in and be like, "Well, they'll stick to what's in their head." Be like, it's okay. That's what That's fine if that's what you thought before, but now you have new information. How can you reframe what you're thinking? That bottom left, speak your mind, even if your voice shakes a little bit. Megan and I have had a lot of these individual conversations, the two of us together. Like, it's scary. Even when we started to plan this, we're like, you're afraid to step in it. You're afraid to say the wrong thing. And we can't just be like, well, we're afraid, so we're not going to do it. But the one on the top left is one that I've gone back to a few times lately. No matter how open-minded, socially conscious, anti-racist I think I am, I still have old, learned, hidden biases that I need to examine. It is my responsibility to check myself daily for my stereotypes, prejudice, and ultimately discrimination. I have to do the work. I have to own up, and I will never be done learning. That top part is really important to me. I have to, sometimes for those of us who have these conversations regularly, it's easier for us to be like, we know this stuff already. That's not real. We never know too much about this. We will never stop learning. We'll never stop growing and reframing our mind and coming to new conclusions. And sometimes we all have to remind ourselves, and that quote in particular has helped me remember that. I'm looking at the clock. I see we're right at the very end. Meg and I are so happy that you all joined us today. I want to encourage you to feel free to reach out to either of us. And I know we're over time. If anyone wants to go, feel free to, but Megan and I will happily stay a few extra minutes if anyone has questions. I feel bad we didn't get to questions, but if anyone has questions, feel free to either drop them in the chat or the Q&A. I'll stop sharing my screen so you see us instead of the presentation. And just for those of you who are still with us, we did record today's presentation. I'm going to send it out later this week to all advisors on campus, which will include you that were here today. And I will also include the link where all of these slides lived in case you missed it already. But it looks like I don't see any more questions coming in. But like I said, we'll stick around for another couple minutes. We're really thankful that you all are making this a priority to yourselves. I see a question. If we would like to require all of our officers to take the RSO training from UNLV, is there a way to track completion? Yeah, actually there is. So that DEI training exists in Canvas, which for some of our fraternity and sorority life advisors who don't work on campus, that's their online learning module. And it actually has a grade book that tells me if students finished it or not. So if you ever want to check on an individual student, send me an email and I'll happily check for you. I think there's one other question that came in. Let me see.
Says thank you.
Perfect. Ross, thank you for that. That's a kind note, and I'm happy to hear that you're going to start to include this with some of your veteran training as well. Zarina, I see you're asking, excellent workshop. Do you all offer a training for FSL advising chapters? Do you want to take that one, Megan?
Yeah. This, I would love all of our advisors to have this content, and they will have this content from the recording of the presentation. I think this is, as we've kind of talked about at different advisor meetings, the beginning, not the end of this conversation. So I'm always looking to kind of expand the toolkit that advisors can pull from, advisors of all types. I'm glad we were able to collaborate on this one. And I know sometimes the fraternity and sorority context is a little bit different. So I'm certainly looking to increase offerings all the time. Hopefully that answered the question.
Yeah, I think that's all our questions. If anything else comes up, send either of us an email. We're always happy to engage with you. We always want to help be resources for you. That's our job, is to be a resource for you as an advisor, to make you all the best advisors that you can be. And in any way that we can support you in that, that's what we're here for. So please don't ever hesitate to reach out. I really enjoyed today. I hope you did too. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you soon.
Take care, everyone. Thanks so much.